Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We have an important hearing today. We're always good to be talking about this topic. We've had a number of hearings on this. We do appreciate all the panel members that are going to be here. I do have an opening statement, but in the essence of time, I'm going to simply submit that for the record. And I'm sure Mr. Cummings has a opening statement that we will submit to the record as well. The United States of America has put a lot of time, effort, money, and blood into making the world a better place. And there are a lot of good work that's gone on, but there's also something different we do in the United States, and that is we are self-critical. We go back, we look, and we determine what's going right and what's not going so right. And so today we're going to have such a discussion, and it'll be a good, vibrant discussion. So I'd like to actually recognize the panel, and then we'll swear you in, and we'll get right off to the statements. Mr. John Sopko is the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. Ms. Christine Abizaid is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia at the United States Department of Defense. It's my understanding that you will give the one opening statement on behalf of the Department of Defense, and that the rest of the panel will all participate in answering of the questions. We also welcome Mr. Howard Stickley, Programs Director for the United States Army Corps of Engineers, Transatlantic Division at the United States Department of Defense, and Mr. Randy Brown, Director of the Air Force Civil Engineer Center at the United States Department of Defense. We welcome you all. We thank you for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. If you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated, and let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. I think you all have experience here. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate you limiting your testimony to no more than 20 minutes, or 5, whatever suits you best. I'm just trying to make sure that we're, based on some of our hearings, that would be record time. So, but we'll give you great latitude here. We would love to hear proactively your perspective. Mr. Sopko, you're now recognized.
Thank you very much. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, it is a pleasure, as always, to testify before this committee and to testify about SIGAR's inspections of facilities and infrastructure built and renovated by the Department of Defense in Afghanistan. SIGAR has issued 37 inspection reports examining 45 DoD reconstruction projects in Afghanistan, with a combined value of approximately $1.1 billion. Although these projects do not constitute a representative statistical sample of all DoD projects, they do provide us a valuable insight into the challenges facing reconstruction efforts in Afghanistan. And I'd like to focus on 5 key takeaways from our work. First, my inspection team found that some of the projects were well built and met contract requirements and technical specifications. However, most did not. Secondly, we at SIGAR understand that reconstruction is difficult in Afghanistan. We also recognize that DoD and its components have taken steps to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of reconstruction projects. For example, DoD has generally been responsive to the recommendations in our inspection reports and has implemented 79 of the 100 recommendations we've made. Thirdly, despite these efforts, many of the projects we inspected had significant deficiencies, caused in part by common and recurring problems, such as unqualified contractors, poor workmanship, and inadequate oversight by DoD officials. Fourthly, Despite these problems, many contractors were still paid the full contract amount and not held accountable for their shoddy workmanship. Fifth, we continue to be concerned, and I think this is an important point, we continue to be concerned about the Afghan government's ability to sustain the numerous facilities DoD has built or transferred it for it. Although we're not focusing on other agencies, we're also concerned about the buildings that USAID has built for the Afghan government and transferred to it, as well as the State Department. Looking at just the base transfers alone, DoD has donated 391 former U.S. military bases worth approximately $858 million to the Afghan government since 2010. They all have to be maintained. The Afghan government has proven itself unable to operate and maintain its facilities on a wide scale. For Afghan security forces facilities in particular, DoD is still spending millions of dollars each year on operation and maintenance services at many of them because the Afghans cannot do so themselves. In light of these concerns, I was troubled to learn during my most recent trip to Afghanistan that our ongoing inspection of the new Ministry of Interior headquarters complex in Kabul uncovered extensive renovations being made to the headquarters building after it was supposed to have been completed, including installing drop ceilings, tearing out recently poured concrete floors, tearing out electrical fixtures, and they're replacing some of those floors with marble flooring in certain VIP and VVIP offices. It appears DoD has contracted for these and other quote-unquote enhancements, which are, according to the statement of work, quote, to improve the aesthetics of the internal finishes, unquote. These enhancements are not only more costly and require more expertise to maintain, but also replace features the Army Corps of Engineers originally constructed in accordance with DoD's own contingency construction standards issued in 2009. Examples like this, combined with the Afghan government's existing inability to operate and maintain its facilities, means the U.S. taxpayer will continue to expend funds indefinitely to sustain some of the facilities DoD has built. And in conclusion, to enhance the administration and oversight of its reconstruction projects in Afghanistan, DoD should continue to improve its project planning and design process, guarantee contractors are qualified and capable, and conduct the oversight needed to ensure that facilities are built correctly and contracts are held accountable. DoD should also continue to work with the Afghan government to enhance its ability to operate, maintain, and sustain its facilities. SIGAR will continue to work with DoD and Congress as it continues to oversee the critical work the United States and its coalition partners are undertaking, and we thank you for the opportunity to testify today about those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Sopko, and to appreciate the diligent work that you and your team do in a very, very difficult place. And Ms. Abizaid, can't thank enough the men and women who actually serve in the military. Again, very difficult conditions at best. We know how difficult it is, but we would appreciate the Department of Defense's perspective, and so we'll now recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You can move that mic, just bring it on right on down there.
How's that?
Yeah, much better. Thank
good?
you.
Thanks, sir. Chairman Chaffetz, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the Department of Defense infrastructure projects in Afghanistan and for your attention to our mission there. I'm honored to have the opportunity to update you alongside my colleagues who are present here today. All of us take seriously our responsibility to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. You have my longer statement for the record, so I will focus my remarks on a couple of key points this morning. Over the previous 14-plus years, U.S. forces have worked with our international partners to improve security and stability in Afghanistan. We are forever grateful to and honor the 2,236 U.S. service members who have lost their lives while serving in Afghanistan, the over 20,000 military personnel who have been wounded, and the thousands of families who have sacrificed for this important mission, a mission that is fundamentally about preventing Afghanistan from once again becoming a safe haven from which terrorists can plan attacks against the United States homeland, U.S. interests abroad, or our international partners. Currently, DoD is conducting 2 complementary missions in Afghanistan: a counterterrorism mission against the remnants of al-Qaeda and other extremist groups that threaten the United States, and a NATO-led train, advise, and assist mission with Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, known as Resolute Support. The era characterized by large investments in infrastructure projects, which coincided primarily with the U.S. troop surge, largely concluded more than a year ago. At the height of our combat mission, annual appropriations for the Afghan Security Forces Fund, ASIF, the Commander's Emergency Response Program, CERP, and the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund, AIF, reached about $12 billion. This fiscal year, those appropriations are down. Congress appropriated $5 million for CERP and $3.7 billion for ASIF. 1% of this funding is currently allocated for infrastructure, and we have not requested any further funds for AIF since 2014. Now, over the last 10 years, DoD completed over $9 billion in infrastructure projects for the Ministries of Defense and Interior and their forces, including more than 1,000 projects supporting basing requirements for the ANA, the Afghan National Army, and the Afghan National Police. Development of this basing footprint has been crucial to enabling the Afghan forces to assume full responsibility for the security of Afghanistan so that the United States and the coalition can end its combat mission. On a smaller scale, DoD also executed projects through AIF, primarily to address the lack of electricity that is impeding Afghanistan's economic growth, and CERP, which local commanders use to address urgent humanitarian and reconstruction needs, such as repairing village wells or building security walls around schools. Now, for each source of funds, the department developed guidance on how projects were to be approved and managed. Generally, smaller scale projects were approved in theater. In accordance with congressional requirements, many of the larger projects were approved at the highest levels of the department and notified to the appropriate congressional oversight committees. Once approved, projects were managed by executing agencies in theater, with oversight provided by various offices, working groups, and councils within the Department of Defense. Now, this is not to say that all projects were problem-free. Afghanistan is a war-torn country with an active insurgency, a history of corruption, poor transportation infrastructure, and little production and manufacturing capacity. Infrastructure development in this environment is challenging, and we have learned many lessons over the last 14-plus years. Now, as my colleagues can describe, we work closely with contractors to manage problems and control costs. We're also successfully using trained Afghan quality assurance personnel to conduct on-site inspections and tests at locations that U.S. personnel cannot regularly visit. I understand SIGAR does the same with its inspections in the current environment. Now, in some cases, projects have failed. For example, SIGAR recently published a report about an Afghan police training facility constructed in 2012 that cost nearly $500,000. The walls dissolved in the rain. That is simply unacceptable. We appreciate the efforts of the Inspector Generals to shine a light on these problems so we can take corrective action. We have worked closely with auditors on more than 500 audit reports and oversight projects since 2008 and have taken action to improve the execution of our reconstruction efforts. In a recent compilation of SIGAR's past reports on infrastructure, SIGAR noted that DoD addressed 90% of its recommendations. Now, no one in DoD is satisfied with a failed project. It hurts the mission, it undermines the confidence in the department, and it wastes taxpayer funds. Fortunately, failure is rare. Due to DoD personnel in theater who continue to work tirelessly and often at great personal risk, the vast majority of infrastructure projects were completed successfully and used as intended to the benefit of the Afghan people and to long-term U.S. interests. Notwithstanding some mistakes, overall, I'd characterize DoD's infrastructure programs, particularly those that have focused on Afghanistan's core security needs, as highly successful and critical to the Afghan government's ability to provide security across Afghanistan. I do want to stress that we are committed to ensuring U.S. taxpayer funds are used efficiently and invested wisely. The American people have made a generous and important contribution to the ANDSF and the future of Afghanistan, and this support has been key in enabling the United States to step out of a large-scale combat role as Afghans increasingly defend their country. In closing, I want to again thank the committee for this opportunity to discuss our efforts to develop necessary infrastructure in support of our mission and to ensure that we are doing so responsibly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To try to comprehend the scope of the spending that's gone on, the U.S. money, I think the Inspector General had said, was it $110 billion from 2002 to 2013? Is that defense money, or is that all of the aid that's gone into Afghanistan?
That's all reconstruction money. DoD has the bulk of that.
Okay.
The DoD money is about $60 billion over that time.
So about half. I was told that the budget for the entire Afghan government is about $5 billion a year. Is that right?
I think that's generally accurate, sir.
Yeah, and then I'm also told that there's other money coming in. Is it NATO money or European money, aid money?
So, sir,
On top of that.
the budget for the Afghan National Security Forces total is about $5 billion. There is international funds to the tune of about $1 billion that is coming in. Mm-hmm. The Afghan government pays about $500 million, and the United States pays the rest.
But we're talking billions on top of billions, right? Was it you, sir, that told me, I'm trying to remember who it was, that the Afghans did not have the ability to absorb or steal any more money?
Congressman, I don't know if I said they didn't have the capacity to steal, but I think they had the capacity to
I was
use.
told by a representative, I'm pretty sure it was out of your office, and I think we have it on the record, because I went back and said, did you say absorb or steal? Because I know when I went there, I had been informed of what, all the way up to the presidency, what money was being stolen. But is that still the case? They don't have the ability to absorb or misappropriate any more money?
Congressman, absorption is a problem. We spend a lot of money there, gave them a lot of money, and they're not able to spend it either.
And then,
Yeah.
okay, another thing too is I'm told that the Taliban now are starting to control more areas, and I read where your area of being able to conduct oversight has shrunken. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So even where we have projects ongoing or we've had projects, you don't have the ability to go in and see what's going on. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's not just us, it's everybody in Afghanistan working for the U.S. government.
When I was there, I was taken to Helmand province. I went to half a dozen provinces or whatever, and around the country. And I remember the troops telling me, look at the school, Mr. Micah. The school they paid 5-10 times. It's the joke of the community of how the United States got ripped off. And that's what you've seen in some of these projects, sir?
That is correct, sir.
Now, okay, you report to both the Secretary of Defense and also the Secretary of State on what you've seen, the abuses, et cetera? Is that correct?
That's correct, and
Okay.
Congress.
Okay, and then I see that Mrs. Clinton was the Secretary of State from, well, until 2013. And you reported not only to the DOD Secretary, but to her. Some of the biggest abuses were in USAID money that I saw. Is that under her, or under Secretary of State, or is it under DOD?
USAID is a separate entity.
But is it under state or is it under DOD?
It's a separate entity. Has an administrator.
So no one, you did not report to her about those abuses, the Secretary of State at the time?
Congressman, we file our reports with Secretary of State,
So
Secretary of Defense.
she had those reports. And are they required to reply, or they do reply? Now, you just told me you replied in 90% or something. Do we have a record of what came out of state?
On all of our reports to go to State Department, we would.
Can
we
you
do.
supply us with copies of the responses? Because it appears a lot of money was wasted and not attended to on some of these projects, not only under DOD, but under the State Department. And I want to see and have in the record the response from DOD and State and what steps were taken. Can you provide the committee with that?
We definitely can do that, sir.
All right. Well, and then the last thing, Mr. Chairman, I'm very concerned about idle assets. You know, federal government should stop, I've always said, should stop sitting on its assets. And we have assets over there that you've identified, not only the ones they're spending money on that you described in renovations that are unnecessary, unwarranted, and costly, but also assets that we have that are sitting idle that we have transferred over to them. And if you could give us a list of those for the record, I appreciate that, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses here today. Mr. Sopko, good to see you again. I got a couple of quick questions on any of our panel members. Have you been dealing at all with the Kunduz situation where we accidentally attacked that hospital in a firefight?
Sir, I'm generally familiar with it. It is an investigation that's happening in the military chain of command.
Yeah. So here's what I'm worrying about. This is just the interplay between hospital construction, and we're doing a bit of that. You know, the chairman and I have been to Afghanistan way too many times, and oftentimes the hospitals look like every other building, not only in Kabul, but, you know, Kandahar and in Kunduz. And I was wondering, as we're doing this, it's not really reconstruction. We're doing construction. It says Afghan rebuilding or reconstruction, but in many cases, there's nothing to reconstruct. We're constructing. And I'm just wondering, on the hospital construction piece, are we building in structural components that would clearly identify those as hospitals so we don't have that accident happen again? I realize that we have very unreliable power sources, so lighting and things like that would be obvious to us in the United States. They don't have those resources there on a consistent basis, but it at least appears among some of the reports that the hospital was indistinguishable. I know the coordinates were provided, but visually, I guess, the hospital was indistinguishable from some of the adjacent buildings. And I'm just wondering if we're curing that defect by within our protocol for hospital construction.
Sir, we haven't yet finalized the details of what the reconstruction of the building that was mistakenly struck will entail. I would say that I would fully expect that at the time that we do decide to reconstruct a clinic, if
Yeah, I'm not
that's in
talking
fact
about
the
that one.
case-
I'm talking about we're doing a bunch of other hospitals. And so that, obviously, that opportunity presents itself with every hospital. And I'm just wondering, and we've got a bunch of them in the report today, a bunch of hospital and clinic reconstruction. Are we distinguishing these buildings from other buildings so this doesn't happen again? That's all I'm asking.
Sir, I'll take that for the record. I would say that I'm not aware of significant DoD projects that are currently underway, other than the rebuild in Kunduz that include hospitals. The ones that were, the clinics that were constructed in the past, I'll need to check for the record to make sure that we did do due diligence on the distinguishing features.
I know in Iraq, your counterpart, Mr. Sopko, had, the Red Cross or the Red Crescent on the roof of these, the helipads, things like that. They clearly identified the buildings were hospitals, and I'm just wondering.
Congressman, if I could add to what the Assistant Secretary said, and this is an issue I think Congress should address. DOD has been very good on having accurate geospatial coordinates for the buildings they've built. We have been publicly critical of USAID for having a rather sloppy and flippant attitude to geospatial.
Okay.
And we have issued, and I'm happy to provide to you, a number of critical letters to USAID administrators to make certain the geospatial coordinates are accurate.
Okay.
I don't know if you read about it. We did a survey and we found out some of the coordinates were in the Mediterranean, some were in Turkmenistan and elsewhere. I think you're onto a good point. I can't tell you about any crescent signals, but you need good geospatial coordinates.
Okay.
DOD has done a good job at that. Aid has been less than
I just spent 4 minutes on my quick question, so let me just jump on. The fact that these contractors are being paid in full, in the United States, of course, we have a different format where we get a performance bond and we hold that back, and if they don't perform properly, we cash in on that bond. We also do retention, 10% of the contract price. They don't get that until we go in there and reaffirm at the end that they've performed their contract. Are we doing any of that?
My understanding is that, yes, we are, in fact, doing that. Let me turn it to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We do use the same FAR procedures in Afghanistan as we use in the United States or elsewhere in the world. The difference is when we contract with these small Afghan firms, we're trying to build construction capacity in the country. We're trying to help them learn how to do responsible construction management. And if we hold much money from them, they will financially fail. They just do not have the resources in their company for us to withhold much.
Okay.
So where we can, we do, but it's a project dependent.
All right. Thank you very much. I see my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. The easiest thing in the world is to spend other people's money, and unfortunately, we have seen over and over and over and over again that there apparently are no fiscal conservatives at the Pentagon. They can say they're good stewards of the public's money, but actions speak much louder than words, and Mr. Sopko's 30-something reports have listed hundreds of examples of just ridiculous waste. I mean, I've got in front of me an NPR report with $770 million on aircraft for Afghanistan that the military can't use. A report that was in all kinds of papers, $34 million on a white elephant headquarters that will never be used. In fact, in the NPR report, Mr. Sopko was quoted as saying, "The joke in my office is we will eventually see a base where on one side of the base they're destroying it while on the other side they're building it, and then they will probably meet in the middle." It's really sad. One organization that looked at this found $17 billion in waste. There's been so much waste in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know that a few days ago, I think a Senate committee got very upset about hearing about $6 million spent on 9 blonde goats from Italy. Are you familiar with the blonde goats, Mr. Sopko?
Yes, unfortunately, I am. It was a program by the Task Force for Business Stabilization. It was basically an attempt to rebuild or build a cashmere market, and as far as we know, it was a failure. They did import goats. They sent a team actually to Mongolia to try to bring back Mongolian goat semen. We're still tracking that down. As far as we know, we talked to a subject matter expert who said they tried to do what they needed to be done in 20 years in a 2-year period, and it was a total failure. We will be issuing a report on that in more detail, but problem is there were no metrics, and what type of metrics they had, they didn't even follow.
Well, it's just really sad, and the American people are disgusted about this. I represent a very pro-military district, but I will tell you that I've been here a long time, and I voted for the first war in Iraq, and because I heard about Saddam Hussein's elite troops and how great a threat they were, and then I saw those same elite troops surrendering to CNN camera crews and empty tanks. So I realized then the threat had been greatly exaggerated. So I became very skeptical about the second Iraq war, and so they called me down to a little room at the White House with Condoleezza Rice and George Tenet, the head of the CIA. Lawrence Lindsay, the president's economics advisor, had said that day or the day before that a war with Iraq would cost us $200 billion. He was fired. I asked about that. Condoleezza Rice said, oh, no, it wouldn't cost us anything like that. It'd be 50 or 60 billion, and we get some of that back from our allies. My point is, all of these actions in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's been so much waste. It's just unbelievable, and yet we're still doing it after 15 years. And this estimate of 50 or 60 billion by Condoleezza Rice, and then we end up spending trillions. And it's just really, really sad. I ended up voting against the second war in Iraq, and it was probably the most unpopular vote I've ever done for 3 or 4 years, but what was the most unpopular vote has over the years turned into the most popular vote I've ever done, because the American people are just fed up with this waste. And they just feel like we're long past the time when we need to stop trying to run the whole world and we start putting our own people in our own country first once again. And I just want to say again, Mr. Sopko, I am very grateful and thankful for the work that you've done over there pointing out this, so hopefully we won't keep doing these types of things in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lynch actually was starting a line of questioning I was interested in, so I'd like to just yield to him.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I appreciate that. Mr. Sopko, I want to talk about Afghan Defense Force training. There are a lot of reports, both in the press and from your office, that the reliability of the data that we're getting from the Afghan government relative to the amount of security forces they have on hand, especially in Helmand and Kandahar provinces, are not reliable. That there's one report that says that up to 40% of the people we're paying in the Afghan Defense Forces are ghost employees. They do not exist. And so the commanders on the ground there are basically taking that money for themselves. There aren't really people there to be paid. And just wonder if your own investigation supports that premise.
That figure, I believe, of 40% was quoted by, I believe, a parliamentarian, an Afghan parliamentarian or a provincial director, I think, down in Helmand province. So we have not been able to corroborate that. The concern we have is we've seen ghost schools, we've seen ghost teachers, we've seen ghost clinics, ghost doctors, ghost civil servants, and we have heard of ghost soldiers. We actually heard part of the problem in Helmand and part of the problem in Kunduz, where the units may not have been as fulsome as we expected. Our concern is we don't really have the capability of verifying that anymore, because we don't have the troops on the ground, we don't have the people. We're using anecdotal information, and that is a concern I think we all have, particularly based upon the history in Afghanistan. Our concerns have been confirmed by the Ghani government. They've done a number of studies, at least on the teachers and the clinics, and they're finding the same things that we are finding. But so far, we haven't been able to do that.
If the, Ms. Abizaid, you have anything on that?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'd just like to respond briefly. Fully acknowledge that there are reports of ghost soldiers, and sort of the volume of the ghost soldier problem is something that we desperately want to get our arms around. I think 40% figure is vastly overrated.
Let me just suggest something.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We don't have to count every single soldier, but look, just take a unit down in Helmand Province or in Kandahar or Nangarhar, whatever you want to do, and just do some samples. We got payroll requests, and you're right, we don't have the resources anymore to do this, full spectrum analysis of what they're doing, but you can certainly pick 2 or 3 units where we're getting requests for funding, and then fly in there on payday and see who picks up their checks, who's picking up their pay. And all you need to do is do 2 or 3 of those, and we'll have a good sample of what's going on, and we might nip that in the bud if they know we're going to do that on occasion.
Yes, sir, and we'll take that back to the field. I did want to say that we are instituting new systems and processes to increase the accountability and our visibility into the soldiers that are getting paid through an integrated pay and personnel system and through the issuance of biometric ID cards for the Afghan National Army. These are really important systems to address the kind of accountability that we're talking about, make sure the people that are supposed to be getting paid are getting paid. And for, to the example that you raised about increasing our visibility into specific units, we actually have pretty good visibility now into the units in Helmand and the kind of roles that they are keeping. And we have noted a significant degree of absence from roles, attrition rates that are higher than we would have expected. Our engagement with the Afghan National Security Forces and the Ministries of Defense and Interior have enabled greater insight as we work to rebuild and reconstitute that force in Helmand that is in the midst of a fight.
Okay. Mr. Sopko, what do you think we should look at? Members of Congress will be going over to Afghanistan fairly soon. Any areas that you think we should look at more closely while we're there?
Security is number one. Verify to yourself as best as you can that the ANDSF has the capabilities. The Afghan security forces have those capabilities. The second thing, Congressman Lynch, is get outside of the embassy, get outside of the command structure, and talk to some of the people, talk to some of the soldiers privately, talk to some of the people in the NGO community privately, and to get their assessment. Every time I go there, I try to do that. Every time I go there, I try to meet with Afghan
And so do we. I have to give the chairman great credit. We get outside the wire every time we go.
Then you get the true picture. You don't get the happy talk
that
you find in the embassy. And the other thing is, Congressman, I've been going there now 4 years. Every time I go, I'm told we're winning, and every time I go, I can see less of the country.
Yeah.
So bad now, I can't even drive from the airport, and no American civilian can drive from the airport to the embassy. We have to fly. Right. Last time I was there, I wanted to go across the street to do an inquiry, and I was told I was going to have to helo across the street at the cost of $60,000. Now, if that's winning, what is losing in Afghanistan?
Well, I would just advise you in closing that if they're advising you not to drive from the airport to the embassy, you should not drive. We've done that drive many times. That's not a good situation. So you continue to fly, sir. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. Mr. Sopko, for the past 2 Congresses, as you know, the House has passed multiple amendments to limit funding or reduce funding for the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund, some of my amendments as well. Unfortunately, these bipartisan amendments don't make it through and into the spending packages because of the insistence by DOD that additional funding sources are needed to finish the projects. I understand that we look to our commanders in the field, We want their guidance. We want to know what they think is necessary to finish the important job that they're doing. But should DOD also fully analyze the costs of particular projects and whether the Afghans will be able to maintain these projects before we allocate additional resources?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. They should.
That's just expected. Ms. Abizaid?
Sir, with respect to Afghanistan infrastructure funds, I would note that most of the DoD funds associated with that, first, we are no longer requesting funds and haven't since 2014. We do want some funds to be able to complete ongoing projects. Those projects are being turned over to a self-sufficient Afghan entity known as DABS, which has actually been quite successful in generating revenues and actually being able to sustain many of the projects that we've undertaken in coordination with you.
Do you anticipate asking for additional reallocated funds for these projects?
Not at this time. We are trying to use portions of ASIF to finish out the projects.
You're confident you have enough funding?
Once the projects are complete, we do not expect any additional funds.
Mr. Sapko, as a general matter, did DOD conduct any risk-based analysis or feasibility studies before undertaking any of the construction projects that SIGAR inspected?
I am not aware of that. I'm not saying they didn't. I don't think they did, but I'm not absolutely certain. I would have to.
Ms. Abizaid, could you answer that? Did any feasibility studies to deal with the taxpayer funds?
Let me defer to my colleagues in the engineering.
I can give you an example, sir, of an AIF.
If you can move the microphone right up under you. There we go.
Yes, thank you. I can give you an example of a project that we started to do in Helmand Province with AIF funding at the Dala Dam that would have been about a $150, $175 million project. And as we got further into the design, we eventually canceled the project because we did not think we would be able to execute it in a responsible fashion. It's an existing dam. We were going to increase its capacity, and we were concerned because of security situation in that region that once we started construction, we might, or our contractor might be forced off the site, and that would have been a catastrophic situation.
Has this then produced additional effort to do feasibility studies and risk analysis before you even begin the engineering and the expensive process?
Yes, sir. I think we do, especially on those large AIF infrastructure projects. We routinely did analysis of the ability to execute the project. So most of them we're doing now are electrical transmission lines, and we think we are able to complete those in a reasonable time and a reasonable manner, and so we proceeded on.
Well, you know, we would all I think feel better if we knew that the process began first with a risk analysis, with feasibility study before we invested. Mr. Sapko, do you believe that the Afghan government is prepared to take over full responsibility, operation, and maintenance of DoD constructed facilities in Afghanistan?
If the question is, are they capable? No, they're not capable at this point. They don't have the technical capability, they don't have the financial capability. So we're going to have to support them. I mean, just to go back to a question one of your colleagues asked, Congressman, they raise approximately $2 billion in revenue. The cost of the entire Afghan National Security Forces is $5 billion, approximately. The cost of the rest of the government we've given them is another $4 billion, $3 to $4 billion. So there's a delta there. They can raise $2 billion, it's $8 to $10 billion to support the government. That delta is provided by the U.S. taxpayer and the coalition taxpayers. So from a financial point of view, they cannot maintain. A good question to ask is how much money are we now giving to the Afghan government to do O&M for all the buildings we give them or build for them? And that's a significant amount. And remember, every dollar of O&M overhead and maintenance that the Afghans spend is one less dollar they can spend for hiring a trooper, for buying bullets, for guns, or whatever. So we got to realize we're stuck now of having built an Afghan infrastructure that the Afghans cannot afford.
Can't maintain that. I appreciate that. That's a question that we need to keep asking, especially in context of how long we continue to put ourselves in harm's way. That includes our taxpayer funding as well. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Supko, welcome back. I have to say, listening to this and reading your report, you know, there's a French expression, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Echoes of Vietnam, echoes of other large investments, both by DOD and AID, and the same old story. Can't keep track of it, billions wasted, had to, you know, demolish it. I'm looking at your report, for example. Your report, inter alia, on the inspection of 6 Afghan National Police District facilities in Helmand and Kandahar provinces in 2010. One of the findings in that report was there was poor contractor performance, to say the least. One of your report's recommendations was to ensure that identified construction deficiencies in future projects be paid for by the responsible contractor instead of the U.S. government. By the way, was that recommendation accepted?
Congressman, I have to check on
All
that.
right.
I don't know. Yeah.
In 2015, your inspection report for the Afghan Special Police Training Center's dry fire range found that the Regional Contracting Center failed to hold the contractor accountable for correcting deficiencies in construction before the contract warranty expired. The Afghan government had to demolish the facility and rebuild it using Afghan money. Is that correct, Mr. Sapko?
That is correct, sir.
Help us understand how that we could arrive at that state of affairs. I mean, I listened to you talk about, you know, if that's winning, what would losing be? I got a helicopter across the street. How in the world, if that's the security situation, how can we, with a straight face, say there's actually sufficient oversight on any investment we're making in Afghanistan?
It's difficult. I mean, I wish I could cite some French back to you, sir, but it's there's probably a phrase to that. I mean, we are in a situation now where we have built too much, too fast, with too little oversight. And I feel like the detective that shows up and the body is not only gone from the murder scene, the chalk outline has now disappeared. And I'm trying to find somebody accountable. Now, the good thing is you have a good team over in Afghanistan with the CSTICA and with Commander Campbell and the new commander there who really are taking this seriously, and they're trying to put conditions on it. The other good thing is the National Unity Government under President Ghani really wants to change things. So that is the positive side of this. And you have, under the Assistant Secretary Abizaid, a good team here that recognizes it. But we got 15 years of real problems. We have 15 years of not applying the metrics, sir, that you and I had a long conversation about. We didn't apply metrics. And to this day, I still have not heard back from the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and USAID to give me their top 10 successes and why. Give me your successful programs and why. Give me your failures and why. If anything right now, you need to rack and stack what worked and what didn't in Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
And nobody is able to say that to me.
You know, in terms of when in doubt, it seems to me, echoing Mr. Duncan's comments, I'd rather pull the plug and not make the risk of an investment than to expend U.S. taxpayer dollars on a failing enterprise that has to be demolished. I mean, I don't know what good is done by that investment, other than I suppose some people can pocket some money and some people can be on a payroll. But the damage done both to our prestige, the symbolism of that failed investment, and the taxpayer here, to me, outweighs the risk of making that investment. Ms. Abazayed, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, sir. I appreciate your concerns, and I also appreciate Mr. Sopko acknowledging all that we've done, especially in recent years as the mission has changed, to scope the mission appropriately going forward. I agree with you. I think that the melting walls on an Afghan firing range is an unacceptable situation to have found ourselves in. I would also say that that is one project, but not representative of the thousands of projects that we've undertaken in Afghanistan. You know, some of the successes that I can cite are having built a basing structure for a new Afghan national security force from which they're fighting a live counterinsurgency right now. And, you know, with some problems, but also some successes. And so, you know, as we look to carry less and less burden ourselves, both in dollars and American blood, we are trying to shift responsibility as much as possible to the Afghan government. I think over the last year we've seen good success in that, and the program now is to find the right balance in terms of what we ask them to do, what we enable them to do, how we can build their own capacity, and what's going to fall to us to address our core national security interests.
I appreciate that, but let me just echo what Mr. Sopko said. If we're that confident that yes, there are some failures we can point to, but there are also some successes, then it ought not to be that difficult for Secretary Carter to respond to Mr. Sopko's request, which I certainly bless. Give us the top 10. You know, help us understand what lessons were learned from these successes. If you want to throw in some failures, that would be welcome too, so that we're not repeating. And that's why I began by saying, plus ça change. Nothing changes in decades of these kinds of investments. Do we ever learn from our experience in investing in, you know, very difficult circumstances where corruption's rampant, where government's inefficient, in the case of the previous government, frankly, of questionable intent in a lot of cases, and a lot hinges on that. And what's the price we've paid? A deteriorating security, badly deteriorating security situation, and a lot of wasted dollars, and that's not without consequence. If I were the Taliban, I'd point to that. I'd point to, if you want to throw your lot in with those people, let me take you to this demolished police training facility or whatever. And so it's not without consequences beyond even dollars. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I'm now going to recognize myself. Mr. Sopko, let's go to 60,000 feet here for a second. Give us the big numbers and dollars spent. And I want our colleagues and everybody to understand the numbers that we're going to talk about here have nothing to do with the war fight. Okay? They don't have anything to do with our fighting, the men and women, feeding them, housing them, tanks, airplanes, whatever else we need to fight the war. This is the construction part of the aid that we're giving them. How much money have we spent in just Afghanistan? It's north of $100 billion, is it not?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's actually $113 billion.
So of the $113 billion that has been spent, how much of it has been appropriated but not yet allocated or not yet spent?
We have approximately, let me get that figure. I think it's $11.45 billion in the pipeline as of the end of 2015. So $11 billion is in the pipeline.
So $11 billion in the pipeline. So to the three representatives from the Department of Defense, how much is enough? How much more money does it take from the United States taxpayers, from the men and women who actually do the jobs and make the money and pay their taxes? How much more money do we have to pour into Afghanistan for just the reconstruction? Or is this just going to go on in perpetuity with no end? How much more do you need?
Sir, I think we are around a steady state amount of about $3.5 billion. That might go up given some Afghan.
So if you have
security
$4
needs.
billion more dollars, you're going to be fine.
In the next year, sir, the cost to sustain the Afghan National Security Forces is about $3.5 billion
Annually.
a year. Yes, sir.
That's just to continue to stand up the Afghan government. And that would come from this fund, is what you want?
That's right, sir.
So yesterday and tomorrow, we're having a hearing about Flint and water. I just don't understand how we pour $100 billion into Afghanistan, and we got people who can't turn on a faucet in Michigan and drink the water. And so we're in tough financial straits in our own country. We're $19 trillion in debt. And it sounds to me like we've got some $7 billion that's sitting on the sidelines. It's already been appropriated. This is not new money. It's already been set aside that you don't need next year, correct? Is that accurate? If you have $11 billion that's been appropriated but not yet allocated, and you need less than $4 billion a year to stand up the Afghan government, what are you doing with the other $8 billion?
Sir, that is total appropriation. The part that is for DOD is the $3.5 billion. The $11 billion is total U.S. government, and that is state aid and other agencies.
Chairman, the 3.45 is just supporting the Afghan military and police. You still got to pay for the rest of the Afghan government, okay? The teachers, the health clinics, the roads, and everything else.
How much does that cost?
Well, as I said before, that's about 8 to 10 billion total. Subtract out the 5 billion, 4 billion for the police. So we're talking about 6 billion.
So help me with the math here. What is the annual expenditure the American government needs to spend in Afghanistan, or that the military and the State Department and everybody else wants to spend every year?
I'd go back to...
This is just the reconstruction, no fighting.
Reconstruction. I'd go back to the figure I told you. The Afghans raise about $2 billion in legal taxes. Taxes. They do illegally tax our contractors, but let's just say legal taxes. It costs about $4 to $5 billion for the military. So we got a $3 billion delta.
Yeah.
And then another $3 to $4 billion above that. So it's $7 billion that somebody has to pay. Up to now, it's the U.S. taxpayers and the coalition. Per year I'm talking about.
And what percentage is the United States paying versus the rest of the world?
Sir, for the Afghan National Security Forces, we're talking about $1 billion from the rest of the world. The development aid, I think I would need to check with state, but I think they're shooting for $1 billion as well.
So, sorry, Mr. Sopko, help me get the top line number here. How much money are we putting in, and how much is the rest of the world putting in? DOD plus State Department, USAID, all that.
It sounds like the rest of our coalition is giving about $2 billion, and we're picking up the other $6 to $7 billion.
And how much, is there any extra money just floating around? Because Mr. Sopko, last time we talked about, it was nearly $20 billion. We were doing more projects in Afghanistan than we ever were in the history of Afghanistan, correct?
Yes. I mean, actually, the amount of money we're spending on reconstruction in Afghanistan is more we're paying for reconstruction in any other country in the United States, and I think we've ever done anywhere. I mean, it's more than we spent on the entire Marshall Plan for Europe after the war.
Sir, so $60 billion total in terms of ASIF, the fund that supports the Afghan National Security and Defense Forces. At its height, it was at about $10 billion a year appropriation. We have worked very hard, as our mission has changed, to move away from building up the ANDSF and the costly experiences associated with that, and getting it to a better steady state level at the $3.5 billion rate that we are currently at. As a means of increasing the efficiency of our investment in Afghanistan, we are looking to slope that cost of the force down. Security costs are very high, both for the Afghan government and for ourselves. And so one of the keys here is reducing violence levels in Afghanistan in a reasonable amount of time. And the ANDSF is going to.
Well, we've been at it
to
for
that.
14 years, so where are we at?
The Afghan government has been in full lead for security responsibility over the last year. They had mixed success, but there was success, and we expect them to continue to develop and improve.
You can't drive from the embassy, from the airport to the embassy. I've driven that. It's not a long distance, but you can't do that today. So are you telling me it's more secure or less secure?
The international presence is certainly under threat in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's less secure.
That is what we're trying to do to protect ourselves.
With indulgence here from the rest of the committee, I have a couple other questions. You know what, let me go back. I'll have to ask a second round. But let me ask one other really quick question. How many people do we have in Afghanistan? I want to know how many DOD personnel and contractors do we have there? Not just so-called boots on the ground, but I think this boots on the ground is a facade, because really, when you go and you hire thousands or hundreds, I don't know what the number is, of contractors, I don't know how those aren't human beings as well. How many people does the Department of Defense have on the ground in Afghanistan?
Sir, I'll have to get back to you on the full number, but you're right. Our contractor to boots on the ground ratio is high. I think it's at about 4-to-1, but I'll have to confirm that and get it back to you for the record.
You got a lot of staff sitting behind you. So if somebody could work on that number before the end of this hearing, that would be really helpful.
Mr. Chairman, I think I can give that number to you.
Sure.
Our best guesstimate, and again, it changes every day, is 39,609 total contractors. It's not just for DOD, it's also for aid and state. 14,222 approximately are U.S. citizens, or 36%. So we got about 40,000 contractors.
And how many employees, or whether they be military, USAID, State Department?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
All right, a lot of staff back there.
We're working on
Bust
that.
out those smartphones. We're going to come up with this number before we leave this hearing. Now let's recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, SIGAR released a report looking back at 6 years of DOD reconstruction projects in Afghanistan. Reports such as these, as well as those by various inspector generals and GAO, are critical to our ability to learn lessons from problems today and improve our efforts in the future. In fact, although U.S. forces in Afghanistan were critical about parts of SIGAR's report in their comments, they highlighted, and I quote, "The value of this report lies in consolidating lessons which may benefit organizations charged with construction efforts in similar environments." Mr. Sopko, how else would you suggest DOD ensure lessons such as these are incorporated into their mission? And I have a cold, excuse me.
I think what I recommended is take those lessons and apply them for every new contract. And I think the best thing to do right now is to do a thorough, complete assessment of the needs for any new construction. And that has been done in the past, and I'm just saying we should do it now. It's probably a good time to do that again. General Dunford did that, and we actually commended him when he was commander of ISAF for saving close to $500 million by canceling programs. So I think that's the way to do it. Now's the time to do an assessment. And not only DOD, aid and state should do it too. And that's a way to incorporate that.
Okay,
Ma'am, can I just address,
Sure.
through the help of inspector generals, including Mr. Sopko, we have learned quite a few lessons in our 14-plus years in Afghanistan. You know, some of the lessons that we have learned specifically about reconstruction and infrastructure projects include having a continual review of the projects at hand. So if they are unneeded, we can actually stop construction on those projects and return taxpayer money. working closely with the Inspector Generals to identify problems, to take corrective action, as we have done in 90% of the recommendations that we heard from this report, including engineering experts on the front end of projects, so we make sure that we're not only undertaking a project that's needed, but building it right the first time around. That's been something that I think we've done increasingly well over time. And balance the need for urgency in a contingency war environment with the kind of analysis that's going to be appropriate in that environment. And so, these are some of the lessons. There are many others that we've learned through cooperation with the Inspector General.
You kind of answered, I was going to ask you questions about that, but I wanted to give Mr. Brown and Mrs. Stickley a chance to describe how the experiences in Iraq have impacted contracting efforts in Afghanistan.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that question. So the Corps of Engineers has done an extensive lessons learned study of our experiences in Iraq and now in Afghanistan. And we have just published a special study of the Corps of Engineers' experiences in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And the Army Center for Lessons Learned is adopting this, and it will be incorporated into Army engineer training in the future, and it will become a part of, it is a part of how we organize ourselves and manage our work in Afghanistan now, and we will apply it to other contingency operations in the future. One of the things that Mrs. Abizaid said that there's a huge lesson for us is that we were probably overly optimistic at the beginning in Afghanistan with how rapidly we could build things. And lots of things, from the security situation to the border problems with Pakistan, conspired against us. So we had good intentions when we awarded contracts 6, 7 years ago, and then the contractors, through no fault of their own and no lack of effort of their own, they just could not achieve the schedules that we set out for. So that was a huge lesson learned for us, is be a little more skeptical.
Being overly optimistic, how much money did that cost, being overly optimistic?
I couldn't begin to estimate that. I don't know. In many cases, what happened was the contractor was just unable to perform, so the buildings were not delivered when we wanted them to be delivered. So in some cases, you see that facilities were completed and then never used. Well, that's part of what caused that. Corps of Engineers simply was not able to complete the construction in the time that we wanted to. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I just would like to address, in addition to what the Corps has already mentioned, a couple other things. I think for us, some of the lessons learned that were critical was that we need to adapt the facilities to the local needs, and so looking at what is available in the local market so it can be sustained over time. So sometimes we may look at bringing a U.S. Construction technique or design and put it into a country where maybe those materials aren't available in that country, or it will be very difficult to sustain. So while we are sure that we use the right standards for safety, we've learned that we need to adjust what we do, especially with the finishes, to make sure that that's sustainable over time. Also, there's a code that we use, the Unified Facilities Code, that all the DoD uses, that we recently, just in late 2013, have released that, and that addresses the kinds of things that we need to consider when we go into contingency operations. For us within AFCEC, we've also updated what we call our playbooks, which is our internal processes, so that both from a contingency perspective and work we do for military construction, we've bounced those lessons learned off each other so that we understand from a standards perspective what we should be doing, and then also what we've learned from this contingency operations to make sure that in the future, as we support the military, that we've captured those lessons learned. They're in our processes, and they'll be there when the next folks are called upon to do something like this.
Thank you. I know my time's up.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sopko, did you testify that $113 billion has been spent in Afghanistan since 2002?
For reconstruction only.
Reconstruction. So, and this includes building the Afghan National Security Forces, to promoting good governance, and engaging in counter-narcotics?
That's correct, sir.
All right.
Among other things, yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the counter-narcotics side of this. Has opiate production gone up or down since 2002 in Afghanistan?
It's one of the most popular crops. It's been a success. Yes, opium production is up.
And what percent of the world supply of non-pharmaceutical opiates comes from
I
Afghanistan?
think, sir, it's 80 to 90%.
That's what I hear too from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. They say about 90% of the world's opiates, non-pharmaceutical opiates. So how much of this $113 billion have we spent on counter-narcotics efforts there?
Approximately $8.4 billion. That's billion with a B.
And how much has opiate production gone up since 2002 or since some benchmark that you can identify?
I don't have the exact number, but I think they're producing well more now than they did during the Taliban years. And it has been the only successful export from Afghanistan for the 15 years we've been there.
Ms. Abizaid, is this consistent with what you know about opiate production in Afghanistan?
I'd need to check and get back to you on how numbers today compare to 2002. I know over the last year, mostly due to weather, there was a decrease in the poppy crop. I think that the weather patterns this year mean that that'll likely increase. But whether it's a full increase since 2002, I'd need to take that for the record, sir.
So I've read reports that opiate production has as much as tripled since we invaded Afghanistan in that country. How much do you think it's gone up, Ms. Abizaid? But has it gone up or down?
Sir, I'll need to take that for the record. I don't have an impression that it has tripled, but that is not something that I follow on a daily basis as part of my portfolio, so I'll check with those that do.
So the counter-narcotics effort is not within the DOD?
Yes, sir, it is within the DOD.
How do you measure success if you don't know?
Sir, the counter-narcotics money that the Department of Defense has spent in Afghanistan has primarily been to support the Special Mission Wing, which is an Afghan aviation program. That's actually one of the most successful programs in Afghanistan. Now, whether that's affected the overall levels of opiates and poppy cultivation, I don't have those numbers for you. I will say that reporting standards have increased widely over the last 14 plus years in Afghanistan as more and more credible sources have come in. So whether in 2002 there were accurate figures or not is something I just can't speak to, sir.
Would you testify today that opiate production has gone up since you started the counter-narcotics effort, or that it's gone down? This is very simple.
I understand, sir. I'm sorry. I don't.
You don't
have the
know
answer
if it's
for
gone
you.
up or down?
I'm sorry, I do not.
How can you account for, I trust you've had a lot of activity because you spent $8 billion there, but what about progress?
The progress that DoD has made in the use of its counter-narcotics funds are represented by the success of the Special Mission Wing, which is an Afghan aviation program. The total levels of opiate production, I will ask my staff to engage and get that answer, and I'll try and have that before the end of the hearing as well, sir.
Congressman, can I just
Yes,
add?
please, Mr. Stein.
I think what you're focusing on is so important. We tend to focus on inputs, that's the amount of money we spent, and outputs. We bought a whole bunch of airplanes and we have a nice special mission wings, but we never look at the issue that you're looking at. What is the outcome? The outcome, sir, is that opium production is higher today. 2014 was the highest production year in Afghanistan. So if you look at any metrics for success or failure, and I've been doing counter-narcotics, I did it for Sam Nunn when I was on his committee for 15 years. I looked at counter-narcotics activities in the United States. You look at arrests, you look at seizures, you look at amount of crops under production, hectares under production, you look at the number of addicts. If you look at every one of those metrics, we have failed. The arrests are down, seizures are down, production is up, hectares under production is up, the amount of money being gained, and more important for Afghanistan, the amount of money going to the insurgency has increased since we've been there. So, sir, to you, and I'm just a simple country lawyer, I don't think we've succeeded in Afghanistan. I make this statement like I did before about winning. If this is winning, what is losing the drug war?
Just to close out here and to summarize what I'm hearing, the war on drugs in Afghanistan, to the extent there is a war on drugs, has been a failure. We've spent $8 billion over there. Production is the highest it's ever been. And here in the United States, we have a heroin epidemic. I think these two things might be related. And, you know, next week, we're going to have a hearing in this exact committee to talk about the heroin epidemic. I think it's time to reevaluate our strategy and our tactics in the war on drugs in Afghanistan. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. He makes a good point, and I would also add to that this is how the insurgency is funded, right? Is it not? I mean, this is where they get their money, their assets to fight and kill and take down America, correct?
That is correct. It's one of the sources. There are other sources. And I would note, Congressman, Mr. Chairman, is that a lot of the activities we're seeing, the fighting we're seeing in Helmand and up in the Kunduz area is drug-related. These are terrorist groups fighting over the drugs, and these are local police and local Afghan officials fighting over drug control. Ashraf Ghani warned us before he was president, if we didn't do something, and if the Afghans didn't do something, his country would become a narco-terrorist state. And I think his prediction is coming true.
Department of Defense, do you want to add anything to that?
Sir, I'd only say that we absolutely acknowledge that narcotics trafficking is a major funder of the insurgency. Counterinsurgency operations that go against insurgent strongholds do so and try and address some of those smuggling routes, some of that poppy cultivation. But it is a serious problem, and it's one that we are very focused on, which is why we funded the Special Mission Wing to engage in both counterterrorism and counter-narcotics missions. I will acknowledge and do have information from my staff that counter-narcotics, that poppy cultivation has generally gone up over the last 10 years. We'll get more specifics for you, sir. And while it has fluctuated year by year, again, often weather dependent, I would not claim that we have significantly degraded the kind of funding that comes from those illegal substances.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney.
This is one of the most depressing hearings I've ever sat through. It's just terrible what we're hearing. And I think at the very least you can start a policy that you don't build any more buildings unless you have proof that they can operate them and maintain them. That's ridiculous that you have to build a building and then operate and maintain it for additional cost. That is insanity to continue doing that. I don't see why we don't immediately stop that process. And Mr. Spoko's statement that he's trying to get a list of what works and what doesn't and can't even achieve that, I think, Mr. Chairman, or some of us should write a letter to support your efforts, and if they can't still give you that list, we should legislate it, put the force of law that they've got to give you this information. And it seems to be a lesson in mismanagement. And my first question is to Mr. Brown from DOD, and I'd like you to briefly explain the difference between a cost plus fixed fee and a firm fixed price contract. And I note an IG report of the Afghan Ministry of Defense. The Air Force Civil Engineer Center awarded a $48 million cost plus fixed fee contract to construct the building by 2010. And it ended up, after 14 contract modifications, the cost was more than double at $107 million. Is that right, Mr. Brown? It's almost unbelievable.
Yes, it is.
And then you go back with a firm fixed price, and they're able to complete it on time, ahead of schedule, for $47 million. So just from that one example, it looks like we should be going with the firm fixed price contract and stop the cost plus fixed fee. But your comments on it, please. Mr. Brown.
I'd be happy to. Yes, cost plus fixed fee is usually used when you have risks that you just don't feel that you can bound them properly, right? So if you can't guarantee what the material pipeline may look like. So it's a shared risk between those who hold the contract and those who you contract with. When we go into a firm fixed price contract, that is where we're much more comfortable that we can set a price and it can be delivered for that price, that there is appropriate risk being carried by both the government and by the contractor. I will say, as we looked back over the history of the work we did in Afghanistan, we saw early on, I think as respective to what was the status of the affairs early on, that we used a fair amount of cost plus fixed fee contracts early when we were early involved. But from about 11, 12 on, we switched most of our work to firm fixed price because at that point we felt we could better guarantee the price and hold the contractor to that. In the case of the headquarters, let me just kind of walk back through what happened there. That was a cost plus fixed fee.
Yeah, I read that, so
Okay.
I just wanted to get to your comments. So I just would like to go to Mr. Spoko. Do you believe that one contract type is better than another? And do you believe that the cost overruns and other issues associated with this project could have been prevented by just using a firm fixed price contract?
Absolutely. I would never use a cost-plus contract in Afghanistan. You're basically asking for the American taxpayer to end up getting fleeced, and that's what you had here. I mean, there is no risk, and I take umbrage with the colleague that somehow we're sharing risk in a cost-plus contract. The only person sharing the risk is the U.S. taxpayer. The contractor doesn't have to do anything. He's going to get the additional funding, and that's what you see here. 5 additional years to do the contract and a cost overrun of hundreds of millions of dollars. So I would never use a cost-plus contract in a place like Afghanistan.
Well, why don't we stop that policy right now? I'd like to ask Mr. Spoko, what do you think we should do now with these out of control costs?
As I said before, I think we need to reassess what we've done up to now. And by we, I mean not SIGAR. We're going to do our own lessons learned on this. I think each agency has to do it. Rack and stack what's worked, what hasn't, and what do we need to do in Afghanistan. But we have to prioritize. Now, we have talked about promising a decade of transition. That means at least for the next 10 years, the billions of dollars that the chairman has been trying to figure out with us that we're going to spend, we've promised 10 more years of this. The other thing you have to consider, if we stop funding the Afghan government, it will collapse. And the bad guys will take over. So we're between a rock and a hard spot, but you really need, from a policy point of view, make a decision. And go forward on that. But I think we need to start by doing racking and stacking and prioritizing what the Afghans really need.
Ma'am, with respect to that prioritization, I do think that we are engaged in that. If you look at the amount of money we are going to be spending on infrastructure projects in the next year, it's 1% of the total request, which the total request is already quite a bit lower than it was. And it is on those priority efforts that are about increasing Afghan National Security Force capability in ways that we don't have to expend U.S. resources to make up for. So in particular, they have a fixed-wing aircraft that needs infrastructure storage for munitions. We're spending money on that. We're not spending money on building schools or large-scale new builds. We are mostly in a place where 95% of the infrastructure build is over, and we are prioritizing our efforts to sustain and to have very clear objectives in what new projects we seek to undertake.
Okay, my time has expired.
The gentlewoman would yield. I wish what you said was true, but it's not, because when we look at American taxpayer dollars, you're a portion of it. Then you go over to the USAID, you go to the State Department, you go to the others, you start to quickly realize that all these other spends on building, goat farms and other things like that, we are spending money on all those things. And if the Department of Defense was just focused on helping secure Afghanistan, I think that would be a different equation, but it's not. And I'll come back to it. But let's recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sopko, you made to me a powerful statement. Earlier, you said in regard to the reconstruction that we built too much, too fast, with too little oversight. And unfortunately, it appears that that is a nagging negative principle that it seems as though at least many feel the pain that's a principle our entire government right now seems to embrace. At least many people feel that way. But within the context of that statement, we built too much, too fast, too little oversight. How many infrastructure projects in Afghanistan are currently in development?
Congressman, I wouldn't have that number. I'll try to find it. But the problem we have is, and this is something we've pointed out for a few years, we don't even know what we built in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So I can't tell you how many are under construction. We don't
That's
know
just
what we've
insane.
built.
We don't even know what
Congressman-
we've built. We don't know what's under construction right now. We don't know what we've done.
Sir, we do know what's under construction now.
Okay,
I
what's under-
mentioned the munition storage facility for the A-29. We also
How
have-
many? I don't need the details. Just how many projects?
I would
do we-
say it's a handful, sir. I can get the details for you on the specifics, but as I mentioned, it's 1% of the planned budget, and we're not talking about very many new builds at all.
Okay, please, if you would get that to me, I would appreciate it. So it seems again that the overarching problem here is lack of oversight. Where there has been oversight, is it fair to say where there's been oversight, we have had a better outcome?
That is absolutely fair to say, sir.
That's correct.
Okay, so what are we doing to ensure accountability to the American taxpayer that there will be oversight on these current projects and future?
So we have increased oversight over the years. I think that if you look at the scope of Mr. Sopko's most recent report, it's relating projects that were from 2009 and some current projects. I think you even see in that report the kind of improvement that we've done in terms of processes and procedures for oversight. There's oversight that happens in the field through CSTICA. There's also oversight that happens in the department.
How long have these things that you're describing, how long have those been in place?
They have increased over time. For instance, in the department, we have a Afghanistan Resources and Oversight Council that is co-chaired by me, comptroller, and one of my colleagues from AT&L. That's been in place for since I think 2013, and we have to approve projects that are above a certain dollar amount to make sure that it's consistent with our policy,
Okay.
our strategy.
All right, excuse me for interrupting. I'll just have a couple more questions. So with that, I mean, time is going to be the test to confirm whether or not these new programs being implemented will provide the accountability needed. But of the projects that have already been built that failed to meet our requirements, did I hear correctly that those contractors were paid in full? I believe that was mentioned earlier.
Many of them. I said that. That's what we've been finding
Okay,
from our
Not all
inspections.
of them, sir.
All right, not all of them, but many of them were paid in full for inadequate jobs. So again, taxpayer dollars wasted. How many of those projects, both the ones that were completed properly and improperly, how many are currently occupied, or percentage-wise? Are they all occupied?
So, sir, of the projects that were specifically for the MOI and MOD, which I think Mr. Sopko in his report listed 27 of them, 26 of those are currently occupied and currently being used by the Afghan National Security Forces. One of them was canceled, actually, by the Department of Defense, and saving, I think, up to about $10 million in tax.
I thought I heard earlier that there were several buildings that were built that were not occupied. Again, part of the we built too much too fast.
Oh, yes, and remember, the universe, we only looked at a few of these buildings. What you really need to do is ask the Department of Defense to tell you of all the buildings they built.
Can I ask
How many
that?
are occupied, how many are being used for the purpose that they...
Can I ask that we get that number?
Yes, Yes, sir. We'll
I mean,
get
and it's
that for
stunning
you.
to me that, amazing at least, that we don't even know what all we've built.
So, sir,
How can we know what's occupied if we don't even know what we've built?
for those projects that we've built for the Afghan military, I think we do know and have good record of what was built. I think where there is less certainty are those projects that were directed under the Commander's Emergency Response Program, which is an appropriation that's gone down over time and has been managed by individual units in the field, captains, colonels, depending on the size of the unit, to undertake immediate need projects like building a well, like walls for school. And so I think that our records on that go to the amount of appropriation that was given to a particular unit, not necessarily all specific projects, but we have good data on that, and we'll certainly get it to you as a question for the record, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sobko, first of all, welcome back. It's good to see you again. One of the largest infrastructure projects in Afghanistan was the new Ministry of Defense headquarters, which has been dubbed a mini Pentagon. This project costs about $200 million, with a significant portion of that coming from U.S. taxpayers. In your report, you say this project took almost 5 years longer to complete than anticipated and cost more than 3 times the original estimate. You found that one of the key reasons for this delay was security issues. In fact, there were multiple reports of suicide bomb attacks at or near the site during construction. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
You indicated that the headquarters building is well built, but it has some issues that need to be assessed relating to its ability to withstand earthquakes. At the time of your report, you were still waiting for documents to close out these recommendations. Has the DOD provided you with the information you need to close out those recommendations?
Well, to close out the recommendations, but we never received the assessments they did. We said they should do assessments, but we have not received those assessments prior to issuing that report. We still haven't received those assessments.
Do you have any idea when you might get them?
We have no idea.
Have you been pressing for them?
We've asked repeatedly, but we couldn't hold the report any longer. We held it for a long time to get those assessments. We still have not gotten written our assessments. Our concern is the assessments aren't in writing, they were oral. That's a concern we have, maybe because we're suspicious. But we still haven't gotten a written assessment.
Why would you be suspicious?
Oh, I've been doing this for 20-some years, sir. After a while, I get suspicious when I ask for something that's pretty simple to get, and I don't get it.
Yeah, we're very familiar with that concept.
Yeah.
You also noted that as of January 7th, 2016, the building was not fully occupied. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you know if it's fully occupied now?
I don't know.
Sir, it is.
It is?
90% occupancy, I believe.
90%? As of when?
That is the update I got from the field over the last 2 weeks, sir.
Thank you. So let me turn to Mr. Brown. The project was managed by the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. Mr. Brown, how did the security situation in Afghanistan impact the budget and construction costs of the headquarters building?
Yes, sir. I'd say there were probably 2 contributing factors there. One was the security you mentioned with the general security around the area. And we saw that impacted us both in dollars and in time. The other thing is the proximity of that facility to the presidential compound. And so when we would see that there would be delays, and there were fairly extensive delays, whenever the president would be moving, we would have to clear the work area of all the workers until the president, Afghanistan president, was back in place or had left the compound. And so that cost us about 10 months and about 6
Whoa. The president moving around cost you 10 months? Is that what you just said?
Cumulative over the whole time. I'm talking the cumulative impact of that.
All right.
Of having to clear the work area of all the workers and then bring them back on once we were allowed to put workers back on the work site.
Had that been anticipated?
No. Okay. I don't think we understood that we were going to have to clear the work area as the head of government moved around.
So what were some of the other factors that led to the delays and increased costs?
Probably the biggest factor was that when we went to start the project, the area that we were going to work in was under the control of the Afghan National Army. It took about 14 months for us to actually to get access to that area. So from the beginning, the project was delayed because we could not get access to there to begin to do the construction work. That was the largest single delay that we had. I mentioned the security issues in there. The other one we talked a little bit earlier. When we were into the project and we decided that amongst all of the folks, including the in-country leadership, that we should convert this from a cost-plus contract to a fixed-price contract, we actually stopped. That took about 7 months to do that conversion while we did that. So that added to that also. So between the three things I've mentioned, security, the ability to get access to the property, and then the conversion from a cost-plus contract to a fixed-price contract, that equated to about 27 months.
So are you confident in the structural integrity of the building and its ability to withstand earthquake and terrorist attacks?
Yes, we are. I will say that with respect to the concerns that were raised, we appreciate that we did provide information to CSTICA to address the concerns. With respect to the seismic joints, we've gone back and that was part of our assessment to make sure that those were installed correctly, that those were designed correctly. Again, we use U.S. standards for that, so these are built to U.S. code so that we are sure that we are building something that is seismically sound, and they are. And so we are confident of that. We are, in large part, not only through our assessment, but because just in this last October, there was a 7.5 earthquake in the general area. There was inspections done after the earthquake. That building held up very, very well. Only minor superficial damage was done to it. So we believe that the building is constructed properly, and it has been turned over and is in use, as it's mentioned in the document today.
Ms. Abizad, this facility has cutting-edge communication and security equipment, including security cameras, key cards, access computers, and X-ray scanners. How will these features improve operations and security for the Afghanistan National Defense and Security Forces?
To the extent that those features make, one, the ministry more secure, and two, the ministry able to connect more effectively with the units outside of Kabul, we think that those are important features of any kind of headquarters element, including the Pentagon. So we do think that it is important to have a fully functioning building for the Ministry of Defense so it can have the kind of leadership over its security forces that are important for their effective function.
Do you believe investing in projects like the new headquarters furthers our national security goals? And if so, explain that.
Sir, yes, I do. The need for the Afghan Ministry of Defense to have a secure building in a secure location and be able to effectively communicate with their forces has been an important feature for just making sure that that minister functions and increasingly on its own so that we're not taking the slack and doing the work for them ourselves, which has features of enabling dependence as opposed to enabling independence. So I do think it's an important part of what we do. I think to do it well is very important. I know that there were the cost overruns are a feature of the security environment, unfortunately, in Afghanistan. They're also a feature of bad contracting in the early part of the contract, maybe some underestimates about how much this was going to cost. And so while I think these investments are important, it's also important that we do them right.
Thank you very much. You'll be.
I recognize myself here. Mr. Sopko, tell me about the Kabul Bank. I had asked you previously about the Kabul Bank. Is there any sort of update on that?
Yes, there is, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you've been very interested in this, and I know the ranking member has been very interested in it. I think it's because of your interest that I actually have some good news to report. We have been working with the new unity government, the national unity government, and on my recent trip to Afghanistan on February 22nd, I met with President Ghani about the Kabul Bank and other matters. The President indicated he wanted SIGAR to work with his new task force that he's creating to find the assets. And so he is giving us complete access to all relevant bank and financial records, as well as other individuals. So this is a tremendous breakthrough. It should have been done years ago, but President Ghani has focused on this, so we're very happy about that. We have no guarantee we're going to get the money. It should have been done, like I say, 5 years ago, but the President is very eager for us to help him and recover the assets for the Afghan people.
Very good, thank you. Somebody from the Department of Defense, what is the Task Force for Business Stability Operations? What does that do? And why is the Department of Defense doing it?
We are not anymore, sir. The Task Force for Stability, for Business and Stability Operations closed its doors at the end of 2014, and we are no longer engaged in the kind of business that TFBSO did. The reason TFBSO was stood up was as part of our counterinsurgency mission. Commanders in the field felt that there was a high demand for DoD to be able to invest in economic development in a way that would complement those efforts of state and USAID. And that was the theory behind the case, sir.
Look, I believe in our United States military. I think they can do anything if they're given the mission and the tools to do it, but I worry that we ask the Department of Defense to go in and do things that is not core to their mission. We're great warfighters at the Department of Defense, but to go in and start doing business operations is maybe a bridge too far. Of all the projects you have on your plate, of all the projects moving forward, what is not related to military or the building up of security forces in Afghanistan?
So with the closing of TFBSO, I think that the projects that I'm most aware of are those that are associated with the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund. And those are about infrastructure projects associated with the electric grid and completing power transmission lines, for instance. Those are projects we undertook starting several years ago, and we're just trying to finish out those projects. And they're projects that we do in coordination with USAID, given the security environment and the expertise that the Corps of Engineers brings to the table. I think, sir, also just one addendum, we are also continuing to do work on the Kajaki Dam, which is also a core competency of the Corps of Engineers.
Do you have a list of everything that you've built? I understand that the CERT funds is very difficult at that level, but do you have a list of things that you've actually built?
We do have a list, sir. I can get that for you.
Mr. Sopko, do you have that list?
No, and what we're talking about, I think, is the SERP. SERP is the black hole. We build a lot, and it's not just digging ditches. We build schools, clinics, and a bunch of other things. And we don't really have that central database. We don't have a central database, nobody does, of all the work that was done in Afghanistan. GAO has found that, and we have repeatedly found that, and we've made recommendations. There should be a central database of all reconstruction projects. And I think my colleague even agrees, with the exception of SERP, they have a pretty good idea. But the SERP funds, we have no idea what we built.
How much money did we spend there?
Billions, I think. I can get the exact number.
Okay.
SERP was a rather large program.
SERP's changed over time. It looks like it's $2.2 billion over the course of the campaign, which is much different than ASIF or the other funds.
You made an assertion that you said, quote, we have increased oversight. Really? How do you make that case? Because it doesn't seem like that's the case. What's the metric you use to come to that conclusion that you've increased oversight?
Well, sir, I talked earlier about some of the lessons learned that we have undertaken to increase the kind of oversight that we've provided for various projects. I think in the field, given the volume of projects that we're undertaking, we have better oversight, and we have a more competent Afghan partner who's grown their capability over several years. I don't know if my colleagues from the engineering world would be able to tell in more specifics how they have done that with specific projects.
Yes, sir. So for construction projects, when we arrived there in 2002, there was almost no construction industry in Afghanistan in the sense that we would think about construction contracting, and there was very little construction engineering capability.
Let me ask you a simple question. Do you have a picture of every project that we've ever done?
I suspect the Corps of Engineers has a picture of every project we've built, yes.
Yeah, that's one thing I've been asking for years, more, and quite frankly, from the State Department. It just seems that in today's digital world, we can take a picture that's at least some oversight that we actually built something. The concern is that with the drawdown of the forces and the ability to even get outside the walls is greatly diminished. Mr. Sopko, perhaps you can give perspective here as we wrap up this line of questioning.
It's harder to do oversight now. We have the largest oversight presence of any of the IGs or the GAO, but it's a security situation we're dealing with. Now, we haven't just given up and walked away. We have come up with some innovative techniques, and one of them is using a number of Afghan civilian organizations and vetting them to get out and take a look at schools and clinics, and then we double check that, and that's how we're getting out to do it. But it's extremely difficult because of the security situation.
All right, let's now recognize Mr. Carter of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Abasad, I'm sorry. The report that was released today by SIGAR it points to many issues about the contractor performance in Afghanistan. And would you agree that the poor contractor performance has hindered the Department of Defense's rebuilding efforts?
In some ways, yes, it has. Again, I would just say that Mr. Sopko's report details 44 projects, which is among over 1,000 that we've actually undertaken in the country.
Okay. Let me ask you something. On these projects, are there any provisions in your reconstruction contracts that require the contractor to complete the project before they are paid?
Let me turn to my colleague.
Sure, sure.
Yes, sir. We use the exact same federal acquisition regulations to do contracting in Afghanistan that we would use in the United States. So they are paid, the contractors are paid based on placement. Every month, every 2 months, they send us an invoice. We confirm they've done the work, and if they have, then we pay them for the work.
So it's not the complete project, it's just that portion of the project that you're paying for?
Yes, yes, sir. We pay them progress. As they make progress, we pay them. And same as we would here.
Do you ever hold back any in anticipation of, you've got to complete this project, not this portion of the project, but this project has got to be completed before you get the last check?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And so when a contractor falls behind schedule, the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, allows us to withhold up to 10% of the value of the project until they either catch up their schedule or they finish. But as I said earlier, many of these firms that we're contracting with in Afghanistan are very small businesses. We're trying to build an industry there. If we withhold much of a payment from them, they will simply fail as a business. They don't have the capital to carry the project. So when they fall behind, they won't pay their subcontractors, and then we have security problems on the job site if the subcontractor.
And I'm understanding of that, and I'm appreciative of that, but at the same time, this is interfering with the Department of Defense's rebuilding efforts. I mean, that's been acknowledged. We've got to do something. I mean, we're getting reports that we're continuing to contract with firms that aren't finishing the work.
The firms in Afghanistan that we do business with have gotten better and better over the years. We've literally had hundreds of Afghan construction firms perform satisfactorily on our projects. We've completed about 1,200 projects for DoD in Afghanistan, and we've literally done business with hundreds of small Afghan firms. So we've created a credible construction capacity there, and they are performing quite well. Security, obviously, is not within the control of the construction contractor, so if his workers are driven off the site or if he can't get material to the site, there's little he can do
Okay,
about it.
all right. Mr. Sopko, let me ask you, let me ask you your opinion of the oversight that the Department of Defense does on these projects. Do you think that it's adequate?
No. No, it's not. Part of it is because of security. It's not adequate. We have seen time and time again, and even on recent projects, somebody can't get out and check and see if the product was finished and it was completed in a proper manner.
Yet they're continuing to pay them.
Of course. If no one goes out and kicks the tires, you make the payment. So, no, and again...
Okay, y'all got me confused here. I got somebody telling me, yeah, we're doing good and we're doing better, and then I got somebody else telling me no.
Sir, we employ, right now, we have 39 projects still under construction in Afghanistan. We employ about 200 Afghan engineers who are capable of visiting all of those project sites and do on a regular basis.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to get back to Mr. Sopko. I've got a report that the Ministry of Defense building took 5 years, 5 years, times the original budget to complete. Yet it's still not fully complete. Is that true? Mr. Sopko, is that...
Well, yeah, I think the construction is completed. When we ended it, I don't think it was fully occupied. I think it's finished, but it's not fully occupied.
5 years?
It's now complete and fully occupied. Mr. Brown's organization took care of that construction.
It was complete last summer and turned over to the CSTICA. And
But I am correct, 5 years?
Approximately 5 years, yes. And we
Is
kind
that
of went through.
acceptable?
No, it is not.
Then what can we do to make it, what can we do to improve? I mean, and out of all due respect, I don't need to hear just, oh, it's security concerns.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman, this isn't the most secure location in Afghanistan. This isn't downtown Kabul. You can see the building from our embassy. This is a thing that was done recently. Now, we have MOI. You can see that from the airport. And so if the security situation is bad, and I recognize there's security problems, if they can't do it under time and on budget there, what do you expect if they're doing something in Kajaki where no American can get to? And that was one of the things they're still working on, the Kajaki Dam. We have been trying to finish the Kajaki Dam since 1950. It is the longest public works project in the history of the United States. It makes the big dig look like a real short dig. Now, we are putting money in it, and I heard somebody refer to DABs. We decided to go on budget because we couldn't do the project ourselves. So we gave it to the Afghans to do it. But there's no Americans checking to see if they're doing it. Last time we heard, the turbine parts had been sitting out there for years and been rusting in a boneyard. They don't fit. They don't work together. But I was assured by USAID it's going to be completed in my lifetime.
You know, maybe what we ought to do is just to get some helicopters and get money and just drop it over the country. I mean, seriously. This is totally unacceptable.
Kajaki Dam is now totally surrounded by the insurgents. And even when we finish Kajaki Dam, sir, most of the, I wouldn't say most, probably a good percentage of electricity is going to be diverted to the insurgents. So we are basically paying for a power plant for the insurgents.
Mr. Sopko, thank you, but I'll be quite honest with you. I could have gone all day without hearing this. This is really disappointing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you, and it is about time we get USAID and the State Department back up here because so much of the waste, the fraud, the abuse is found within their organization.
Yes,
So,
Absolutely.
we'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mike.
Well, I don't mean to belabor the point, Mr. Sopko, but I have the transcript from 4/29/15, and we had you in, and I was asking at that time what the amount was you had cited that they couldn't absorb, or and I said steel, but here's my words there. I believe the amount was $20 billion that in Afghanistan money that was backed up. They had neither the ability or capacity to spend or steal. I think it was that an accurate statement? I was asking that, Mr. Sopko. I think you are correct. It is more than $20 billion right now that's been appropriated, authorized, but not yet spent. And I guess in a subcommittee hearing on April 3rd, 2014, I had asked you for information on a list of Afghan nationals who you found were held criminally accountable for some of the theft. And you provided a response to me at that point. You also said as of March 31st, 2014, $18 billion remained to be spent. It was either backed up and couldn't be absorbed, or if you want to attribute the stolen to me, I'll say that. What's the amount now, would you estimate?
I think that it's down to approximately $11 billion.
But they still can't absorb, or I believe, they can't absorb that money. They don't have the capacity to absorb it. So the good news is some of that's been cut off. We're not giving them more. Then I went into prosecutions. Did DOD or state go after money that was defrauded or criminally expended? Are there any instances? I mean, there's a lot of fraud and waste and abuse going on, but we could go after fraud and criminal action, and that's been cited.
Well, DOD doesn't actually prosecute cases, nor do we investigate them and then turn them over to
Can you give us cases?
There are examples of us holding to account those that we have evidence of fraud, waste, and abuse.
But
I think, and that's been enabled by Mr. Sopko.
How many criminally have been held accountable in United States court? And then you outlined some of the difficulty in prosecuting with Afghan within Afghan courts. Can anyone give me a number? 10, 20, 30? I could tell you over 140 in New York on the Sandy project.
Well, I can get that for the record, sir.
I want that in the record and a response. I follow up on these things. Okay, then you went on to cite in your letter to me that one of the difficulties was prosecuting in Afghan courts, right? And you actually got one person in to testify, I guess a law enforcement person in a case there. But at that time, 2014, we didn't have an extradition treaty. The United States has extradition treaties with 110 countries. Who negotiates the extradition treaty? Secretary of State?
State Department.
State Department.
So we never, do we have one now in place? We still do not have an extradition treaty, so we can't go after them there. Then there was another handicap you cited. The Afghan First Initiative, U.S. contractors were restricted, so they're giving the stuff to Afghan contractors who we really couldn't monitor or go after criminally. Is that still in place, this Afghan First requirement?
I believe so.
Do you know?
Now, I'm not aware, I do not think it is still in place.
Well, that would be good to know, because we have no recourse. Any percentage of what you think has been wasteful or, you don't like me to use stolen, but fraud. I mean,
Billions, sir, billions, just
billions,
billions, I
and
would
yeah,
yeah.
and we have not been able to go after them, or if we have, it's been limited both in Afghan courts or U.S. courts.
Well, Mr. Micah, can I just add, we have, SIGAR has worked very closely with the National Unity Government and the President and his people.
And you got one person to...
Well, since then, we actually uncovered a scheme to defraud $1 billion contract that was going to be issued by the Afghan government. It was U.S. money. And we brought that to the President's attention, and he did something. He fired generals. He opened an investigation on it. So this is the difference with this new government versus the old government.
Okay. Well, again, an extradition treaty would probably help, too. It sounds like there's still going to be spending money. Maybe we could request that, or our Secretary of State to do that. Finally, what's it look like as total assets left behind value? Since we don't have an inventory of the projects, which is astounding, is there any guesstimate as to our, I know we're leaving billions behind, but is it, we spent 110 million. I'd have another question, Mr. Chairman, if you, and then I'm very concerned about in Iraq, you know, we spent $1 gazillion training these guys, and then they cut and run. Has anyone done an evaluation of our programs there, and do they have the ability, either as a police or defense force, to hold things together?
Sir, I would say that the Afghan National Security Forces are actually one of the most nationalist institutions in Afghanistan, and we've actually seen them fight very well over the last year,
well,
obviously with some challenges.
Yeah, but like that's not a good answer, because I'm the best representative in the 7th Congressional District. I'm the only one.
Sir, understand, sir. I would say that what we have seen is a strong ANDSF, and a strong commitment to defending their country. How they compare to Iraqi security forces is not something that I have an answer for you on.
Okay.
Sir.
Well, again, and then the assets, the amount, maybe somebody could calculate what we're leaving behind. I know some things it costs you more to take the asset out, but there's some infrastructure that you can't remove that we're leaving behind that they can't maintain, or where they've taken control of it, we're spending more money to renovate it that we don't need to do.
Sir, we are engaged in a dialogue with the Afghans about excess infrastructure that we do not think that they need, and we think that they should divest of.
For the record,
and we will give you a list
record?
of that information for the record.
Maybe we'll have an inventory too.
Congressman,
don't feel bad though, because we don't have inventory of the public assets, the property that we have in our own agencies in the United States, let alone someplace that's under attack.
Congressman, just so you know, this week my Special Projects Unit just issued a report that partially answers your question. It discussed that between January 2010 and October 2015, DOD transferred or closed 616 of 715 bases in Afghanistan, and the value that DOD put on it was $851 million, and that consists of 11,000.
And that's bases, so
bases and excess
we got
property.
Lots of USAID, tens of billions going in to a country that only has a $5 billion annual budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. We now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Just a few questions. Speaking of training, Ms. Abizad, some of the construction projects have been constructed as training facilities, is that right?
That's correct.
And they were to house the Afghan National Police and the Afghan National Army. Are the Afghan soldiers and police being trained in the facilities that were constructed with U.S. dollars?
That's right, sir. Yes.
I mean, and how's that going? I mean, is it adequate for what they are trying to accomplish? Do you know?
The training effort that's ongoing is extensive. It is one that happens in the midst of a counterinsurgency fight. But my understanding is that, yes, the training that is ongoing, some of which we advise but don't do ourselves because Afghans are now doing it for themselves, is going generally well.
Now, Mr. Sopko, one of the facilities that you inspected was the Kalai Muslim Medical Clinic in Kabul province,
That's correct.
which was built with funds from the Commander's Emergency Response Program. Your report concluded that the clinic was serving the community well. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why did you say that?
Well, it met its contract requirement to build it. It was well built. It was being used as intended. So it was a success story.
So, in fact, you found that in 2013, clinic records showed over 1,500 outpatient consultations, 63 prenatal patients, and 63 newborn deliveries since the clinic opened in 2011. Is that right?
I believe so, sir.
And you also found that the Ministry of Public Health was sustaining the facility, and inspectors noted clean floors, well-kept bedding, working heating and electrical systems, and a well-stocked pharmacy. Would you call this a success story?
Yes, it is a success.
And that's one of the exceptions, I take it.
Yes.
Just listening to you today.
Yes.
Sir, I would disagree a little bit with it being one of the exceptions, that a success is an exception to the rule. It might be an exception in the world of Mr. Sopko's 44 projects that he reviewed, but we've undertaken thousands and we do have other successes, and we're happy to answer Mr. Sopko's questions about those.
Are there a number of medical facilities?
We have constructed some clinics and some medical facilities over the years, usually through SERP funds. But that is more now the business of USAID and the State Department.
Well, going back to this particular clinic, I think I would conclude that it's a success story. According to USAID, the percentage of women in Afghanistan receiving prenatal care has increased from 16% in 2002 to 60% in 2010. And this has coincided with an infant mortality rate that has decreased by 53%. That's significant.
That's right, sir. Life expectancy and generally quality of life in Afghanistan has improved quite a bit over the last 14 years.
And you would attribute that to our efforts?
To U.S. government and coalition efforts, yes.
And why do you say that?
The amount of enabling capacity we've built for the Afghans, the amount of skills that we have developed within the Afghan workforce has been significant in terms of increasing literacy rates, increasing the amount of women that are in the workforce, increasing the amount of girls that go to school. Education is much better. Afghan security forces exist in a way that they didn't previously, so they can provide for the security of the Afghan people. So in large part, Afghanistan is a much better country than it was when under Taliban rule and when we got there originally.
So do you know what the life expectancy was? Do you have any comparison numbers?
Comparison numbers exist. I don't have them with me, sir.
Very well. Thank you very much.
Just a couple of questions here as we wrap up. Ms. Abizaid, if the cigar is asking for the top 10 projects, is that something you can get for him?
Yes, it is.
When? By when? When's a good, reasonable time to get him that?
We will get it to him in the matter of a month.
All right, fair enough. You mentioned biometric IDs. Explain to me how you're doing biometric IDs.
So we have instituted a biometric ID card system for the Ministry of Defense and the Afghan National Army. It'll likely be extended to the Afghan National Police. But this is an ID card much like DoD civilians, DoD military have, that have critical bio data about individual soldiers, and is what is going to be a key piece of requiring that we pay who has the ID, and it increases the accountability of our pay and personnel system.
You can go ahead and leave that microphone on because I'm going to keep asking you a few more questions. When you say biometric information, what would that include?
So it includes a number of things. I mean, I think date of birth, and ethnicity. I think that there is a particular social security number that is associated with each. The details of the biometric ID card I can certainly get to you.
Will it include a picture?
It does include a picture, sir.
Do you take fingerprints? I mean,
I'm not
our
sure
own
about
government here, I mean, the FAA can't seem to do this, so I'm just fascinated that you think you can actually execute this. It's not like they can go to local Kinko's and get a picture taken and then go get a real ID.
Sir, I think they'll be issued as part of the in-processing in the recruitment and training aspect of the intake.
But don't most people get paid through a Hawala system? I mean, they're not going to a Wells Fargo bank or Bank of America to go cash their checks.
That's a system that we're changing, sir. I mean, there was a culture of trusted agents in far provinces where banks were not available, where Afghan soldiers would have to rely on them and often get skimped in terms of their monthly pay. But we've actually moved to a mobile money system, which has had significant success, and it connects soldiers to actual bank accounts, and they can see on their phone what their balance is and how much they are due.
Okay, well, we look fascinated. And Mr. Sopko, I hope you can help follow up on this, because I think that's laudable, but I think I can't imagine that you can actually pull that off. I think that's probably the standard we should get to, but we have a hard time executing that here in the United States with an awful lot of infrastructure. In a place like Afghanistan, I have a hard time believing that you can actually execute on that. But more luck to you, but I don't know how much that's going to cost. I mean, we're dealing right now with the Homeland Security that has a very difficult time with this at best. And Mr. Sopko, if you can follow up on that, that would be great.
We will. We've monitored it, and actually, in support of the Assistant Secretary, it is an improvement. We're at least having unique identity cards.
Right.
But, this is 15 years into this, we're finally getting that. And we're asking for people when they leave to give their identity cards back, and we hadn't been doing that. We've issued a number of reports on it, but we're glad CSTICA is moving out on that.
Great.
It's an improvement.
Very good. Mr. Sopko, we've talked about this in the past, but the $100+ billion, how much do you actually think got to Afghanistan? How much has been siphoned off? How much can we actually point to and verify?
Mr. Chairman, as before, I'm in an awkward spot. I can't give you an answer. All I know is billions have been wasted or stolen, but I can't tell you the exact number. We don't even have the number of all the projects and know where they're located, so it's very difficult for us to do that. No one can.
How much, and tell me about, you cited, Ms. Abizaid, about the fixed wing. To explain that project and why you think it's a success, and how much did we spend on it?
So we are in the process of delivering fixed-wing platforms for close air support for the Afghans to have as an organic capability. They have 4 A-29s, Super Turkanos they're called, and we will eventually build to 20. This has been a critical piece in enabling the Afghans to independently fight the counterinsurgency fight, and one where the burden on the U.S. assets will be significantly decreased as they increase their capacity for their own close air support missions and aerial fires missions.
All right, so we want to try to tackle this one again. How many people do we have working for the United States in Afghanistan?
So, sir, my crack staff did get the answers for you. So we will confirm these for the record, but what we could find out in the time allotted, we have 9,800 troops in Afghanistan, 11,542 U.S. contractors. There are more third country nationals and Afghan contractors that the United States is spending money on.
And that's just for the Department of Defense?
This is for the Department of Defense, sorry, I don't have
Correct.
other numbers. And then in terms of civilian manning, we're talking about 290 now, but I think that the requirement for civilian manning will likely increase as our military footprint decreases.
And Mr. Sopko, when you cite nearly 40,000 contractors, is that in addition to her 11,000, or is that include, when you say 40,000, includes the Department of Defense?
That would include. That would include.
So we have just less than 10,000 troops. In addition to that, we have roughly 40,000 contractors, correct? For
That's our best estimate.
a grand total of just less than 50,000 people, correct?
In terms of U.S. citizens or contractors that work for the United States
Yeah, a lot
government?
are
It's a different number, sir.
Yes. We're paying close to 50,000 people to be there, correct? Between contractors and troops, some of them are Americans, some of them are not Americans. It's roughly 50,000 people to keep our mission moving.
I think that's a good rough estimate, sir.
Okay, all right. Listen, thank you so much. There are a lot of good people in very difficult, dangerous situations. They're away from their family. I've been there several times. I need to go back again. But it is a difficult mission, but it is also a vital mission. And cannot thank the men and women enough who are putting their lives on the line to do this. So you thank the four of you for your dedication and your patriotism and your commitment to the country. This is a valuable exercise. It's a lot of work goes into these reports and the analysis, and I don't want you to think that that just goes up on some shelf. It's very, very helpful as we try to figure out from our component or our vantage point, what it is we should do or where we should go next. So thank you again very much for that, and the committee stands adjourned.